Good morning, and welcome to our talk, Humans Over Numbers, the show where we have conversations about culture, stories, trends, and life in the workplace. This has been previously called Monday Mornings with Milestones, but we've decided to change the name. I'm Felix Dusablon, an avid reader, fitness enthusiast, and an aspiring polymath.
I am Brooke Albert. I'm the resident new mommy at Milestones and the office nerd.
Yeah, so today we're celebrating a couple national days. We're celebrating National Hand Roll Day. I'm actually not sure what that means. I'm guessing like the food. National Fried Chicken Day, International, not national, international, whole world Kissing Day. It is also when Athena Gibson is the first African American to win the Wimbledon in 1957. That's a pretty big day historically. And the day Forrest Gump was released in 1994. That's a great movie, one of my favorites. Haven't seen it, go see it now. So today we're going to be talking about politics in the office. Are they unavoidable confrontation or a welcome opportunity?
I think the part of the reason we decided to discuss this was we're getting not only current national events, but we're moving into election season. It's a presidential year in the United States, and it's going to become a thing. I think most people usually try to avoid it, but every 4 years, it seems like the environment gets a little more heated and people are more open to talking about politics, if you want to call it that politely, at work.
Yeah. People are definitely getting more open with their conversations they're having at work. We talked about this last time with like how much professionalism is in the workplace, and I think the way the shifts have been going, there's becoming more open to having these conversations about like politics and such. And so we wanted to have this conversation about that. In addition to what you exactly said, it's election year. There is the political climate is getting more and more polarized as we're going, and so those conversations are getting more and more pertinent, and well, they're getting a little more escalated. So we thought this would be a really important conversation to have about the workplace and the workspace as they relate to each other.
And we're kind of piggybacking right off of the last topic we discussed with professionalism, because for the most part, and I think Johnny C. Taylor Jr., president from SHRM, said in an interview in 2019 with Nicole Lipkin, I think it was published on Forbes, that we're kind of not to talk about religious, sex, politics, I think even wages is something that he mentioned in the workplace, and that really that's not okay. That kind of sets you up to have a lot of toxicity, hurt feelings, hostility in the workplace because you can't openly talk about something, and there's not a lot of there's healthy communication and unhealthy communication, right? And when it comes to politics, people are so heated and have such strong opinions about certain things that they have a habit of being unhealthy in their communication about these points, right?
Oh, okay. I had skimmed over the article. I gotten a very different impression of the article. I thought it was advocating for making politics like the other categories and saying, no, let's not talk about it in the workplace, just like we're not supposed to talk about religion, we're not supposed to talk about our personal life, the very intimate details of it, and so we should now throw politics into that same group of not talkable things, like these are taboo at the workplace. And that's what my impression was. I only skimmed it though, so it's interesting that you're saying it's already there and maybe we need to bring it out, or my impression was that it's out in the workplace and needs to get put in the closet. But that's actually a great conversation. Should that be something that goes to the closet, or should it be something that stays out in the open?
So I personally do not talk about politics, but I know how angry I can get because the argument that I have when it comes to United States politics is completely off the handle from what 95% of the population is going to argue about, right? What's important to me isn't even some of the issues that come up. It's like a completely sidebarred, no one thinks about it, so I just don't talk about it unless someone specifically addresses me and asks that question, right? But for things like religion, sex, politics in the workplace, they are already occurring, and I think what was so great about it is Mr. Taylor made a point to say, you need to teach your leadership team how to have these discussions in a civil manner, make it a healthy conversation, and bring in people to help train HR, your people, how to have these conversations, because it doesn't matter if you're like, no, this shouldn't happen, because he says like not talking about it isn't compliance, right? We're putting those two together, and it's not
Okay. So I was actually thinking about this like in a different way. I was thinking like there it's hard to have good things come out of these conversations. I was like, all people get is they get angry at each other, the climate gets really nasty. It's like, how could there anything positive come out of like conversations about politics in the workplace? I was like, that just so maybe we need to talk about the company, especially the HR departments and the managers, make their decisions about what politics in the workplace is supposed to look like, and it would be a none. Do not talk about it, please. You like, if you do, talk about it in your own time. And even then, I was actually reading some interesting article, and it mentioned that people should be careful, even in their own time, about flagrantly putting out their political views, because their coworkers could see it on their social media, and then next time they're at work, it's like instant like cat fight goes off, and so they need to be very careful in how they present themselves, even outside of work. And so my impression was, wouldn't this be a good thing to say, let's just have a straight up policy of please do not talk about this in the workplace, especially during things like election years when it would get really heated and could become quite messy. But then your point is that it would be something that, I don't know, is maybe bottled up. It's just not good if we push it aside and repress it.
Well, it's okay. So, like the HR summer school happened on Monday, the extra credit hours, right? With Ben Eubanks. He had Sarah Noel Wilson on, and she discussed addressing elephants in the room.
Great talk. I loved it.
It was wonderful. And I think politics kind of falls underneath that, because people are connected on Facebook, they're connected on LinkedIn, they're putting their personal opinions out for coworkers that they work with who aren't going to agree with them. And there is an elephant in the room, and it's politics, so we don't talk about it, right?
Right.
And then that does lead to, I have a problem with something that you said, but so how do I address that? What do I come to you with to be able to talk about that in a healthy way and let you know that I was kind of offended by what you said, or I don't approve, or I don't agree with you. And even with some of the stuff that's happening now, you're seeing a lot of that. And cancel culture is all over the place because so-and-so said something. I really think what we should be focusing more on, instead of saying don't discuss these things in the workplace, is how do we talk about these things in a healthy way, in an open way, in a way that I am actively listening to what you have to say. I'm taking that information, I am processing that, and I'm saying, okay, you are saying this, is that correct? Here's the problem I have with that. And then you actively listen to what I have to say, you take those things into consideration, and you come back with another thought. And that's just part of having a relationship with someone in any shape or form, professionally, at home, whatever. You have to be able to communicate. It doesn't even have to be clearly. You just have to have, and my husband tells me this all the time, you have to be generous with other people's intentions. So even if I say something that really puts my foot in my mouth, right, and I have just ultimately pissed somebody off, if they're generous with my intentions and they're assuming that I am not trying to, you have to make a big assumption there, right? That I am not trying to offend you, that I'm not trying to be hateful, that I'm not trying to say you're the worst person on the planet, but I'm trying to say something else. You clarify that. Now, you are going to run into people who tell you you're the worst person on the planet, right?
Right.
And there's a way that you handle that. But for the most part, that's not what's happening. It's just people having a huge miscommunication, or just not being willing to open up and be honest with each other and say, I don't agree with you, but you got a good point.
Right. I think that's actually a good point. Initially, I was thinking, yeah, we should have that closed off, but I think instead of having the regulations about what you can't say, it maybe is regulations about how to say it. And actually, I think that your point about having communication being there is a really good one to have, because it makes me think of a quote. I think it was originally when I saw it, I think it was attributed to Isaac Newton, which I think is wrong. So, but I'll give you the quote anyways. It said, if you and I both come with a bag of apples, and I give you an apple, and you give me an apple, we both leave with the same number of apples. But if we both come to each other with an idea, you give me your idea, I give you mine, we both come away with 2 ideas. So ideas aren't like a normal substance that we can like pass back and forth and we come away even. Every time we share in a positive way, we always come away with more. And so as long as you're able to have that conversation, both people can always leave with more than they came to it with. And that's the fantastic thing about a conversation and ideas. Now, the issue is people, especially with like things like politics, they don't like to share their ideas. No, they like the idea of sharing their idea. They like to share their idea. They don't like to
Here.
hear or someone else to share their idea, someone else's idea. So I know the pronouns are getting really confusing here. And so it's not reciprocal, and I think that's one of the problems. And I think that might be the conversation about how to talk through this, how to talk through these things.
Well, I think also, because you keep talking about like, let's ixnay, let's make it company policy, we don't talk about this at work.
Right.
That was really fast, so sorry. The issue with that is then you're kind of impeding on people, right? So you're taking away what should be an amendment guaranteed right, is free speech. Right? And we in the business world, just because it makes for a really crappy workplace, can't say, look, you can't talk about these things. It's not allowed. You'll get fired, right? Or you'll get disciplined. Because that's infringing on that. Now, if you work at an at-will state, and someone says something that embarrasses your company on social media, and then it gets tracked back to you, it's up to your company to make that decision. And that's still in a really gray area.
Well, it's an interesting point. So I think this is going to be something I'm going to get in trouble probably for, but freedom of speech it's a right as every citizen to give. However, when you work for a company, just as I used to be a high school teacher, and you cannot say certain things, like I couldn't as a teacher, and students technically couldn't as students of that institution say certain things, just like there's like profanity in like a high degree you're not allowed to say. It's not because you don't have the freedom of speech to do it. You have the freedom of speech. However, the privatization of that company does allow them to regulate what you say. So they do have their right to say it. However, I think the idea behind the freedom of speech, which even though in application, no, you can't be in trouble for having your amendments broken at work because they didn't let you speak freely, that's something they're allowed to do as a company or as an industry or as a organization. They can say, no, you're not allowed to talk about these things. But I think it hurts the idea and that ability to share ideas. And it could potentially hurt the culture as well. And so I think though a company's allowed to make their statements about no, you may not, I think I'm getting more and more swayed by what you're saying and saying that I think it's beneficial to have and allow those open conversations to occur. Obviously, things like saying nasty things about your company, the companies should be probably allowed to like delete a post that's really super negative press on it. But even then, that's a question about that's a whole different conversation, no different topic. What can a company censor? But that's I think something that we should have to do a whole different time, whole nother conversation, because that's such a big thing to talk about. But I think they do have the right to say, no, you can't talk about politics, no, you can't talk about these faux pas topics, these hot topics, because they just are hard to conduct in a civil manner. Though, I was like, you're swaying me very quickly about this idea that maybe it should be something that is open and would be encouraged to have open conversations about. So then, what does the policy look like that we would create that promotes healthy conversation about politics?
That's a good question. I think first, right now bias is the huge buzzword, right? And it's only going to get worse, and it's going to become more and more apparent. People have biases, and it's going to be more apparent that they don't recognize that it's a bias, right? I had that conversation last night. Biases are not just negative things. They can also be preferences. Colloquially, right, just in modern English, because we have a living language, it's gone from that kind of psychological term where it's a bias, it's a learned behavior, can be anything, right, to it's this negative opinion you have about something. That's a bias, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
First, I think for any company, HR especially, management teams, leadership, need to recognize that they are going to have an opinion. And we have a thing called confirmation bias. We want to look for things that confirm and agree with our opinion. And I think the more leadership in HR recognizes that, the easier it's going to be to make a policy. Because you can say, look, I'm all for you guys having a conversation. It's election year. On the night of a presidential debate that day or the next day, why don't we take lunch and we'll have everyone together and we'll talk about it. How did the presidential debate go? What did you guys think? What would you have liked to see the responses? And you have like your whole team, right? Kind of having this, I didn't like what that guy had to say. I think it should do this. I think our policy nationally should change to this. And I think it changes it in a way because your leadership is there, right? If they have the kind of training and the openness to sort of mediate to keep it from getting toxic, but then you're still going to you risk having people who are going to get super offended by it or super angry, or how could you possibly think that, right?
Right.
So it's just such a difficult thing, but I think the more out in the open that you can have it and the more you are able to sort of mediate when it's going to happen, so it's not just happening out on the floor, it's in a controlled environment, people are able to discuss it however they want, right? And giving them that opportunity kind of helps eliminate that toxicity a little bit. Because if your leadership team that's there and hosting it and we're talking about it, we're all together, if they're able to say, well, hold on, I can see that you're getting upset. What's bothering you about what he just said? Or if someone says that, it's like, hold on, let's clarify what you just said was XYZ. And that person could be like, well, no, what I really meant was, let's get down to it, right? And I don't know that a lot of people really recognize how to do that. I am personally trying to get further and further and further into that. Really helping my marriage and talking to anyone at all, ever, is learning how to say and take a deep breath when I can see that there's a miscommunication coming and that people are getting upset with me. Be like, okay, this is what I am trying to say. And this is what I think you are saying. Is that correct? And that gives them a chance to sit back and say, yeah. Or, no, I didn't mean to call your dog ugly. I'm just saying she doesn't look like a chihuahua. Right?
Right.
So I think that's one way that you can do it.
Okay, so part of what you're saying is maybe, one, have those political conversations in a controlled environment. So by having it in a intentional area, you can be intentional about it so that it doesn't break out into the angry yelling across cubicles on the floor somewhere, distracting a bunch of people, but actually happens at a designated time. You're like, okay, here's our conversation. And so people feel like it's been addressed, so they don't have to go out and do it on their own and probably make a sort of botched mess out of it. It's one of the things I'm assuming that you were saying with this, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it definitely helps with that. Because even like you're on the manufacturing floor, right? And Bob has to work next to Sue all day long. It's going to come up, right? You get bored pushing the button or whatever.
Okay.
And I think if you give them a way to talk about it at lunchtime when they go back on the floor, they could, well, I mean, it's a little gossipy, right? They could be like, can you believe that Jill thinks that? Well, yeah, but she had a good point when she said this. Oh, and Dawn, right, said that da-da-da-da-da. And it just, I think it's a great way, one, to make politics more of what they are supposed to be and less confrontational. It's more of a sharing of ideas and trying to come to I recognize what you want. This is what I want. We're going to bargain until we get to what's best for both of us. And two, I think it eliminates that eventually it's going to come up and then they're going to hate each other. And someone's going to quit, right? 1 in 5 people quit because of a toxic workplace.
Work culture, yeah.
So I think it helps eliminate that a little bit and kind of helps back that up.
Okay. So I was thinking what would be, to me, I would think would be important for a HR company, if they're not going to ban it outright, which was my initial thought, but if they are going to have it more open, I think it would be smart just to have a guideline published or like written. And I guess you just need to get comfy because this is where I'm going to have my little spiel. This is actually a conversation I had over lunch with someone at work, interestingly enough, was talking about opinions and like talking to people in practice. What are the best practices with conversation, especially with other people? And the first thing is there's sort of 3 main points, and then one of these breaks into 3 smaller points. Talking with people, you need to seek first to understand. Some people who have read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey will recognize that as one of the rules, one of the 7 habits. So you always have to seek first to understand. I feel really bad if I'm wrong about that one. It's been a few years since I read it, but I remember that. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind when you talk to somebody. It's there's a French proverb as well. It says to know all is to forgive all. So right, if you understand where the other person's coming from, why they feel that way, what they're thinking, it'll help a lot with your approach to them and to help you with not getting frustrated. You hit on that point exactly a minute ago when you're talking about, wait, is this what you said? Let me clarify. When you're talking to someone, that literally stems from that. So that's the first thing, and I go much more into that one. Then the next one is politeness, right? Even if you feel like they're wrong, even if you feel like they're an idiot, there's no reason not to be polite. There's never a reason not to be respectful. So always being respectful and always being polite are, I think, staples of having these conversations. Now, to me, this is sort of a jokingly easy thing because my family's Canadian, so we're like politeness abounding. Someone holds the door and the person's 40 feet away, right? And they're like, here, I'm holding the door for you. And it's like, okay, well, give me a few minutes to get there, but yeah, thank you. And then they're like, I was so bad about this, like in in college, I actually figured out, it took me 2 languages, another language, not even English, to find it, a word for you're welcome to you're welcome, right? Someone would say, thank you. I'd say, thank you. They'd say, you're welcome. And then I'd say, you're welcome to that, you're welcome, right? And it was a German word, which doesn't actually, I think, work for the way I was using it, but it was bitte sehr, which is like, you're welcome to you're welcome. So they would be like, thank you. I'd say, thank you. They'd say, you're welcome. Then I'd say, you're welcome back. So I'm overly polite. I get that, but I think it's a much worse thing to be under polite. And so having that conversation, politeness is really, really important. The third point, though, this is the one that I think, I don't know if you'll agree with me on this one, but this is the one that breaks into 3 other points. I think it's extremely difficult to change someone's point of view. It's really, really hard to change other people's opinions because of 3 things. Something called a schema. For those of you who know psychology, you'll recognize this term. Opinions and personality, or opinions and identity, and then egoism or egotism, right? So first is a schema. If you don't know what a schema is, it's the basic framework from which your mind works. It's how you understand things. And your schema is how you approach the world, right? Your political opinions are part of your schema, but also literally your idea of like gravity, that's your schema. I taught high school, as I just mentioned earlier, and my boss, the principal, she used to be a teacher. She taught biology for a long time, and when she would teach plants, she was trying to get the students to understand that the roots suck up the water, right? And this is a concept that most of us know, it's a fact. However, interestingly enough, it wasn't in most of the high school students' schema. They assumed water was absorbed through leaves. A lot of people think this, and that's their schema. So even when they were corrected for this information, they were told, hey, the water is absorbed through the roots. The information bounces off and cannot get absorbed into your consciousness and into your memory. You cannot remember that information if it is outside of your schema. This actually explains why you can't remember a lot of things when you see them and read them, because you can't actually process it. It does not process it if it's outside of your worldview. If it's outside that framework, you cannot fit it in anywhere. There is no storage space for it because you have not allotted it in your worldview, which is why people with really, really close worldviews, they're so hard to communicate with. So understanding that people have a schema, like if you talk to someone of a specific political party, especially if they're really right-wing or really left-wing, their schema is very centered around that. So convincing them of an outside point is not very likely. So if you approach this with that knowledge that someone's probably not going to get convinced because their schema literally will not let them accept the information you are telling them, I think it's helpful to understand. It might also make you wonder why we ever have any conversations with anyone, because which I would say there are some people who have more open schemas and they're willing to adjust their worldview as they respond to information and new information, but most people don't. Next thing is opinions and identity. I've found that a lot of people have tied their opinions to who they are, right? People aren't just me. I'm not just Felix. I'm Felix and my political view. My political view is now part of me. So when that political view is countered, it comes as a personal attack, right? I have tried very hard to make sure that my opinions and my worldview are not attached to me. But so, for example, this is where I failed at this. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I am like hardcore Star Wars nerd, right? I read tons of the books growing up. I read the comic books. I could tell you things in the Star Wars universe that happened thousands of years before and hundreds of years after the films, right? I knew a lot about Star Wars. So when Disney came in and like steamrolled my universe, I was very upset, and I was not happy about their opinion, their changing of it. And this is part of a lot of fandoms are when new properties exist. I had made Star Wars part of me. I was like, when I would describe myself as a Star Wars fan. That was part of my identity. So someone attacking that, or someone mixing up like Star Wars and Star Trek, my personal identities felt attacked because someone hated or thought the new Star Wars was good. I felt my whole world was like, that was against who I was. And so I had to fight back. And that's how people feel about all their opinions. And even opinions like pineapple on pizza. People have attached that to their identities. And so now when you tell them pineapple goes on it or doesn't go on it, they feel attacked.
Cheese. Mine is cheese.
You think cheese has to be on pizza?
Well, cheese in general. When people tell me I don't like cheese, I'm offended.
That's funny. Yeah. Oh man, I have like stories about cheese. So my family is like crazy cheese family. They love cheese.
Is this
we're
the French side?
Yeah, French side. So we have a thing about cheese. My wife is lactose intolerant. So when she, like mildly so it's not like she is like dies
Crippled,
anytime she has cheese. But my family are cheese crazy. So she came to my house, and for 4 straight days, most of our meals revolved around cheese. We had like grilled cheese. We had cheese all over our food. We had like a freaking smorgasbord of random things, and most of them were cheese, like little pieces of cheese she would eat. And so she felt horrible. But so my family's a huge cheese family, so I think that's really funny. But anyways, the last point is, I've been talking for a while here, I know. I told you had to get comfy before I started. This was my spiel, is ego. A lot of people, it's not only that it becomes tied to their opinion, but they can't be wrong because their ego doesn't allow them to admit failure. So even if they could have a flexible schema, right, they could change their worldview. Even if they did not tie it to their identity, they can't admit that fault because then they feel like it means less of them, right? There's the people who can't say sorry, right? It doesn't match. Yeah, I know we had a conversation about this today outside of this, but they can't because it literally means accepting defeat, and they cannot do that as per their ego. Now, this is the one I think a lot of people attribute to having conversations with people, and they come away, oh, that person was such a so-and-so, and I can't have that conversation because they're so full of themselves, they can't say they're wrong. And I think that's the third piece of why you have to understand people aren't likely to change their views.
Well, I think the number one most important thing to remember in any conversation is that you are not trying to convince the other person that your point is correct.
Right.
You are trying to come to an understanding of that other person. It is fine that you're going to have different opinions. There are some things I personally will never accept, but I'm not going to do everything in my power to try to convince you that you're wrong.
Right.
Or that I'm right. My main goal, if I'm ever talking about it, is to just give you the information, to ask you to think about it. I'll think about what you said, right? And just reach that understanding. It's, Sarah Noel Wilson mentioned curiosity of self, curiosity of other, and curiosity with other. And that is 3 steps to communication in any kind of discussion, talk, argument, debate, whatever you want to call it, that you need to keep in mind. So I guess in summary, what have we decided about politics today at work?
So it looks like we have a couple ideas on how to guide these conversations. I guess you would want to write them down and have them in a handbook or something and be like, look, when you're having these conversations, these are things to be aware of. I don't know that you would want to write down in a handbook like a schema, what a schema is, how that applies to it, and like why they're not going to ever listen to you. But have the awareness that your goal is not necessarily to change the other person's mind. You're not going to sway their vote. You're not going to change the way they're voting in the election season, but you can hopefully come to an understanding. And that's, I think, the whole goal of these communications is to come away with 2 apples, right? To come away with 2 ideas.
Well, yeah, and I think the main thing that we should focus on more than guidelines or anything is to help your management teams be ready be prepared. Everyone needs to have this conversation. This is going to happen. And this is a way that we as leadership can help our employees get through this so it's not such a toxic environment, because it doesn't matter what we do, these conversations are still going to happen.
Right.
So if it's that we facilitate these conversations in a controlled environment to try to limit the amount of miscommunication and anger that comes out of it, then so be it. If it's when it comes up and someone comes into your office to complain about it, you try to counsel that person to reach out, or maybe you do have a meeting with them and the person they had the disagreement with and try to come to terms with it. I am by no means saying that if someone is absolutely hateful and
right
beyond behavior that should just be swept under the rug, but I am hoping that with this talk and hopefully us kind of addressing some of these issues and food for thought, we can avoid that happening by leadership and HR and management or whatever being ready, being cognizant, knowing this is going to come up and trying to be prepared for ways that they can make it less difficult to walk through. Because like you said, not talking about it is not making the situation any better.
Right, yeah. You pent up those emotions, you have those conversations elsewhere where it's not healthy, so yeah, there needs to be a way to handle it. Now, another thought is if you do try to facilitate it yourself, some people might not want to talk about it, or only one person will talk about it, and then people will leave, and then they'll start, or you have them get kind of heated in the meeting and then you let them go. Does it get more heated as they get out further and you accidentally started the fire that fans into this huge inferno? So that might be something to consider, but it is good that you could say, yes, there's a moderator here. Like, this person technically writes your paycheck, right? Or at least handles your paycheck, so you've got to listen a little bit and be aware of that. And so that could be something to consider. But also having like those guidelines about clear and good communication, right? If you make it so that everyone understands, and these are just good rules for anything, like seeking first to know what the people are and engage in active listening. That's actually the term for what you were describing with, like, when someone says something, you clarify first what they said before you go at it, right? And that way they have their opportunity to revise it, and so that you can't be like putting words in their mouth, because that's something that happens so many times when people are in arguments. They're like, oh, that's not what I said. I said this, right? You put words in my mouth, right? And we just steer away from that whole thing by allowing people to understand how to communicate properly, right? I think more value would be gained from having everyone go through a seminar with active listening skills, communication skills, these really fundamental soft skills that a lot of people have lost. And having people understand those will be not only beneficial to this political climate, but beneficial to any engaging activities they have when they're talking with customers, when they're talking with coworkers, with other business professionals, any professional. It's just skills that they can take outside of the workplace, skills that will be useful to them no matter where they are. So maybe giving people an opportunity to be trained in these proper soft skills, these proper communication techniques, will be a much more valuable and very good investment. The investment that will keep on giving. The more it goes, the better it gets, right? And so the more these employees will understand that, I think the more you can get out of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Plus, at that point, you're investing in your employees, right? And everybody wants to be invested in,
right?
By their employer. It makes you feel important. So, I think we pretty much covered politics in the workplace.
I think so too.
At least a little bit. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening, and hope it's somewhat entertaining or valuable to you guys. And yeah.
All right. Well, we'll if you have any ideas, just shoot us them. We love to talk about it. If you have any concepts that you would love to hear us talk about or tackle, just shoot us a message on either LinkedIn or communicate to the Milestones team. We're very involved with them, so we can have that conversation just anywhere you feel like you can reach out to us. Just reach out. We'll be happy to look at this and have these conversations with you or about these things you have that you want to bring to the table. Until next time.
I'm Brooke Albert, and for the record, don't feel guilty for Googling polymath. I hope you guys have a great week.
All right. Bye.